Hey, hello. Get a pen and paper and review your learning with these questions, and in 5 seconds the answers will come up. So mark your answers, and again, if you're struggling with these, get onto Brainscape and get studying. So what are we going to look at today? Well, we're looking at two conditions that increase the chances of cardiovascular disease. So we're looking at obesity and diabetes. Take a look at the key learning points, pause the video, read through the key learning points, because we're going to use these really at the end of the video to check your learning, and then use them to think what your questions are as well. So diabetes, if it's untreated, then it leads to high levels of blood glucose or sugar in the blood. And if this is high for a long period of time, then it can cause damage to blood vessels. It can damage the endothelium cells, the lining of the blood vessels. So there can be macrovascular disease or damage to the major blood vessels in the body. And there can be microvascular disease, the smaller blood vessels. So diabetes can increase the chances of damage to major blood vessels, and it can increase the chances of atherosclerosis, which in turn we've learned is a root cause of a lot of cardiovascular disease. But also the smaller blood vessels in the body can be damaged or hemorrhage, which basically means that they bleed. So the retina, or in the eye, is quite a common place for damage. The kidneys or renal failure can be quite common with diabetics. And then peripheral nerve damage or peripheral nerve dysfunction. So nerves at the extremities of the bodies can be quite commonly damaged. So damage to the retina because of this hemorrhaging of the blood vessels, the small blood vessels at the back of the eye, can affect eyesight. Pause the video and just have a think about this question. So why does protein not normally move out of the capillaries in the kidney into the urine? Well, if you think back from exchange of materials, we learned that proteins are big, too big to normally move out of the capillaries. But because the blood vessels, the capillaries have been damaged because of this diabetes, the blood vessels in the kidney, sometimes they leak things out of them that they shouldn't. So the kidney's job basically is to clean the blood, to filter the blood, and anything that's waste material, if you like, is put into urine. So your urine is produced in the kidneys. So proteins should normally, they're useful, they're not a waste product, and that the protein should normally stay in the blood and not leave the body in the urine. But because of damage to the blood vessels, sometimes the proteins can escape. Diabetes can lead to damage to nerves as well at the extremities of the body. So because of reduced blood flow, a nerve cell is a living cell, and it needs blood. It needs a good supply of glucose and oxygen for it to be healthy. So because of this reduced blood flow to the extremities of the body, the nerves tend to be damaged as well. It's quite common for diabetics to have issues with the feet. They lose the sense of feeling in the feet, and so they can't feel any pain, which obviously can be quite dangerous. So how is blood glucose level controlled? Well, pause the video and have a look at these questions. So think back to National 5 and name the two main hormones involved in controlling blood glucose levels. And then more recently, in Higher Human, we've been learning about this term antagonistic. So these two hormones are antagonistic. What does that mean? And where have we heard of it recently? Well, did you get this? Can you remember? The two hormones involved with blood glucose levels were insulin and glucagon. And antagonistic, what does that mean? Well, remember we talked about antagonistic when we were talking about the SA node, or the pacemaker of the heart, and that there was the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerve leading to the SA node. So antagonistic means something that affects the same area of the body, but they have opposite effects on that particular part of the body. So insulin and glucagon, they affect the same part of the body, but they have opposite effects. So what are the effects? Well, again, thinking back to National 5, so if you have a lot of glucose in your blood, if you have high blood sugar or high glucose levels in your blood, and this is detected by the pancreas, cells in the pancreas, and the pancreas secretes a hormone into the blood, and that hormone is insulin. And then insulin travels in the blood from the pancreas to the target tissue, which is the liver. It basically sends a signal. It tells the liver, or enzymes within the liver, to start turning some of this excess glucose in the blood into a storage material in the liver, which is called glycogen. Opposite, remember antagonistic? Well, if blood sugar levels are low, then this is detected by cells in the pancreas, and they send out a different messenger. This time they send out the hormone glucagon, and this travels in the blood from the pancreas to the liver, but this time the message is different. The message is opposite to insulin. It's basically saying to the liver, right, give us some sugar, turn some of that glycogen back into glucose, and that's what enzymes do within the liver. So pause the video. There's a diagram here just explaining that again. There's a written section here. Pause the video, have a read through this written section that describes in a little bit of detail how blood glucose concentrations are maintained in the body. However, there is a third hormone which affects blood glucose levels, and we've not learnt about this before. We just learned about insulin and glucagon before. So adrenaline actually affects the blood glucose levels. Now, we've learnt about adrenaline before, and we learnt about the effect it has on heart rate. Can you remember when it's released and what the effect is on heart rate? Well, we release adrenaline in fight or flight situations. So in scary situations, if we're stressed, then adrenaline gets released, and it increases our heart rate. It has an impact on the SA node and increases the heart rate. How do you think it's going to affect blood glucose levels? Well, in a fight or flight situation, you're going to need more energy. You're going to be running away, or you're going to be fighting for your life. So energy is going to be required. So you're going to need more glucose, and that's what adrenaline eventually leads to. So adrenaline, when you face these stressful or situations or scary situations, then adrenaline has an effect in that it stimulates the release of glucagon. And remember, we just learned that glucagon sends the message to get more glucose into the blood. So adrenaline, in effect, increases the blood glucose levels. So diabetes, what is it then? Well, there's two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. And type 1 diabetes is when you are unable to produce insulin. So pause the video. How would that affect your blood glucose levels if you were unable to produce insulin? So if you can't produce insulin, then obviously your blood glucose levels are probably going to remain high, particularly after meals. So type 1 diabetes is usually detected in children. And because that messenger, that insulin, isn't being produced, then the message isn't being sent to turn the excess glucose in the blood into glycogen. And so you end up with high levels of glucose in the blood, which again leads to damage of the blood vessels. Type 2 diabetes tends to come on later in life, and there's a greater chance of you developing type 2 diabetes if you're obese. So if you have type 2 diabetes, you do still produce insulin, unlike type 1. But the problem is the receptor cells on the liver. So insulin, remember, hormones travel to target tissues, and then they bind to receptor cells on the target tissues in order to send the message. So the issue is these receptor cells, and they're damaged in the liver, so that they're unable to receive the message from the insulin. And the end effect is the same. The glucose isn't converted into glycogen, and so you have high levels of glucose in the blood. This is treated differently usually to type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is normally treated by injection of insulin into the blood. Type 2 diabetes is mainly treated by diet and exercise. So again, pause the video, just a review of the differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So how do we know that you have diabetes? How is it diagnosed? Well, it's diagnosed by using a glucose tolerance test. So I won't run through it, just pause the video and read through the instructions of how the glucose tolerance test is carried out. Again, pause the video, have a look at the results of the glucose tolerance test and see if you can notice two differences between a diabetic and a non-diabetic's glucose levels throughout the test. So do you notice that at the start of the test, the diabetic already has a higher level of blood glucose than a non-diabetic? So they start off with a higher level. And then that level goes much, much higher throughout the period of the test than a normal subject or somebody without diabetes. The second main point really is that how long it takes for a diabetic to get their glucose level back to their normal level. So it takes much, much longer for a diabetic to get their blood glucose level down than it does a normal person. So obesity is another factor that has an impact on cardiovascular disease. And obesity can be measured and defined, if you like, by something called the body mass index. So the body mass index is a comparison of height to mass. And there's an equation for calculating your BMI. And if you have a BMI of greater than 30, then you would be classed as being obese. You need to learn this equation. It does come up in exams, and you need to be able to calculate it. So BMI is equal to the body mass of an individual in kilograms divided by their height squared. So make sure you remember that it's the height squared. And then what you can do is you can compare height to weight or height to mass, and it tells you whether you are underweight, healthy weight, slightly overweight, or obese. Remember, we said higher than 30 is the definition using BMI of obese. So I was going to use one of my own photos, and the results would have been very similar, but nobody likes to show off. So what's the issue with using BMI to measure obesity? Well, this guy, who's 120 kilograms and 1.9 meters tall, if you put that into the equation for BMI, it works out that he has a BMI of about 33, which would mean he is obese, and he's obviously not obese. So what's the flaw with BMI? Well, the problem is people like me and him, muscular individuals, well, using BMI, we would be classed as being obese. So that's a slight flaw with this as a measure of obesity. What causes obesity? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Energy in and energy out. So if your diet's not good, high fat diets in particular, and if you do very little, you don't expend a lot of energy, then it can lead to obesity. So high fat diets are bad for you because fat as a food group has a lot of calories in it compared to other types of food. And it also contains sugars, the types of sugars that are very easy to break down and don't require a lot of energy to digest. Exercise is obviously good for you because if you exercise, then energy out is increased. So you're getting rid of some of the energy that you've put in by means of your food. We learned earlier as well that exercise increases the ratio of HDL, high density lipoproteins. And remember, high density lipoproteins are the good ones in effect, not really good ones, but they carry the cholesterol from the bloodstream to the liver so that you can get rid of excess cholesterol. So that also is good. It helps to reduce blood pressure, which reduces the chance of cardiovascular disease. And it reduces stress as well. So stress leads to the release of adrenaline. And we've seen the effect, haven't we, of adrenaline. Adrenaline tends to increase your blood sugar levels. And high blood sugar levels can lead to cardiovascular disease. So stress can lead to cardiovascular disease, but by exercising, that can help to relieve stress. So again, we've covered a lot. You can rewind, go over it again and again and again, but please use these key learning points as a measure. What have you understood? What have you not understood? And what questions do you need to ask?